The Manipur crisis has now entered its fourth month, and the Chief Minister's appeal to forgive and forget isn't really resonating with either the Meitei or the Kuki community. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo story. Our relentless focus on the situation in Manipur continues. In the national capital today, members of the Kuki community have once again taken their protest to the heart of the capital at Jantar Mantar. On the ground, the situation continues to be perilous. Remember, you're talking about a situation where thousands of weapons, including high caliber weapons, are in the control of civilians. You're talking about a de facto separation of the state, where, as you have seen from our ground reportage, a member of one community cannot enter the stronghold of another community. In a few moments from now, we'll be talking to a Hyderabad University professor from Manipur, who's in fact facing two criminal cases for his comments. One of them, at least, relates to his comments on the crisis in Manipur. Another case is, of course, unconnected and relates to allegations for fraudulent electoral entry. We are going to be talking to Professor Kham Suan Hausing. He's a professor at the Hyderabad University. He's a member of the Kuki community, and he's been an outspoken critic of the situation in Manipur. Now, the Chief Justice Chandrachud, has offered him interim relief for 2 weeks from any coercive action. Let's welcome Professor Hausing to the program now. He joins us here live on the Mojo story. Thank you, Professor Hausing. Let me start by asking you, you have 2 weeks of an interim protection from the Supreme Court, from the bench of the Chief Justice. The allegations against you, and I'm starting with this, I'll come to the larger situation in Manipur in just a moment. The allegation against you, one pertains to hurting the sentiments of the Meitei community, inflaming allegedly religious passion. The other says that there was a fraudulent electoral entry. Are you worried that you're going to be arrested? Because this protection is only for 2 weeks, and then you have to seek relief from a court in Manipur.
Barkha, let me first of all thank you for having me in your show. I'm worried, but not really as desperate, because I still believe that a fair sense of law prevails in Manipur despite the pervasive lawlessness. And I hope that my appeal to the Manipur High Court would be taken on board, and frivolous charges framed against me would be quashed or stayed by the respected court. The context in which the charges are framed are most unexpected, because I gave my intervention both in the print as well as in the visual media because of my long-standing research and expertise on Manipur and other parts of Northeast India. I have researched and written extensively on issues of conflicts, issues of nationalism, issues of power sharing, and politics of accommodation for the past 20 years. And the fact that some individuals use, my intervention as, abetting intercommunal discord or promoting religious enmity, I think is bizarre, to say the least.
You call it bizarre, but yet, as you said, despite a lawlessness, and I can testify to the fact that the state administration has lost a lot of moral authority, you still believe in the fairness of the legal process, clearly.
I do.
I'm glad to hear that. I want you to speak now. We'll see, the law will take its own course. Do you want to say anything in particular of the two allegations against you? One, that you hurt the sentiments of the Meitei community. Two, that you were guilty of fraudulently entering a name in an electoral roll.
You see, on the first set of criminal charge framed against me on issues of promoting religious enmity, on conspiracy against the state, so and so forth, as I have pointed out, I spoke basing, all the things that I say, both in the print as well as in the visual media, on the basis of public documents available. And I think there is nothing wrong unless we have descent into total chaos and anarchy. And when lawlessness, in effect, does not permit a fair sense of intellectual as well as academic freedom, that's a different matter altogether. But given that we still live in a country which, in effect, profess faith and commitment to constitutional values and principles, especially on issues of freedom of speech and expression, especially some of us, who are trained as well as, who did very extensive research on this domain, I think the charges are very frivolous charges. It would not stand the test of fairness in the court of law. So in that sense, I think the set of charges framed against me was malified as well as very spiteful. And given the fact that this was admitted by the Imphal, Chief Judicial Magistrate is Imphal without investigating the matter, in effect raised a lot of issues on the intent of this particular campaign against me. That's one. The second is most unfortunate, I believe, because to say and to ask a question about my Indian citizenship simply on the strength of the right to information petition that was filed to the chief electoral officer Manipur on 19th June, and the response come unusually very swiftly on 26th, which is very unusual because Manipur is supposed not to be very particularly effective. And given that the right to information was filed right 2 days after I gave interview to Karan Thapar, shows that this is a very orchestrated campaign, to kind of falsely implicate in something which is not having any foundation whatsoever. And what is laughable about this all is also about the ignorance of the complainant about citizenship law in India, precisely because, first of all, in the first place, just because my family name, especially my father's name, did not appear in 2005, does not, in any way suggest my citizenship in the first place. I have posted in Twitter as well that to search for the ghost of my father after 16 years of his death in a particular constituency where he was never registered, and to impute motive saying that I have fraudulently tried to obtain electoral ID on the strength of that very ignorant, ill-informed, misguided information is laughable, but also deeply unsettling because it in fact bespeaks about the mentality which drive the fabricated charge sought to be framed against me.
Okay, we'll see, of course, what the court in Manipur, and as you mentioned, the Manipur High Court will do. Let's move on to the larger situation. Now, you saw, can we come out of these pictures, please, and we can show some images? Can we come out and show these some images of our own reportage from Manipur as we look at the ground situation? I want to ask you to talk about the larger situation. You would have heard the chief minister appealing for people to forgive and forget. He's not been very voluble in the last 3 months. He's been quite absent. Now he makes this appeal. How do you think it will go down with people?
You see, forgiveness comes when there is an admission of sins or admission of mistake committed. And I think given that the role of the chief minister in this particular instance is deeply problematic, and there are a lot of evidence to suggest that the chief minister has been complicit, if not very actively, condoning as well as promoting this total mayhem. I think unless the perpetrators of the crimes against humanities in effect come forward and seek for forgiveness, I think mere talk about forgiveness and forgetting would not make much sense to me.
What is the way ahead, sir? Coming back from Manipur, I can testify to the fact, and I'm saying this not for the Manipur people, they know this, but for people outside of Manipur, that if you want to go from place A to place B, let's say from Imphal to Churachandpur or Imphal to Kangpokpi, which is normally a 1 hour drive, you cannot today go if you're Meithei into a Kuki area, you cannot go as a Kuki into a Meithei area. We also know that 3 months on, bodies, in this case mostly of the Kuki families who used to live and work in Imphal, who had to flee the city, have been lying in hospital morgues for more than 3 months. The mass burial has not yet happened. There are families devastated, still waiting for their dead to come home, be it an 84-year-old woman who could not see or hear, and she was killed. I met her son, be it two young women who worked at a car wash. We met all of these families. Now, my question to you, Professor Suan, is where do we go from here? If the government does not accede to the demand for a separate administration, where do we go from here?
You see, I have belabored much on this topic, and one of the things that we have to take on board is to what extent would it be permissible under constitutional democracy like ours to allow and leverage, absolute autocracy of the majority, right? That's one. It's for the political elites, political class to decide that in these instances, in the case of Manipur, what plays out is that there is a particular majoritarian as well as integrationist drive, which is deeply uneased with actually existing diversity as well as deep difference in Manipur. And there is a reluctance as well as arrogance, to dismiss out of hand. And that is precisely which is why you have a deliberate, a long-term attempt to kind of dissolve extant asymmetrical institutions which give protection to tribal rights as well as issues of autonomy in Manipur. And I think until and unless democratic institutions work, and until and unless democratic institutions attained certain semblance of legitimacy, the whole issues of identity politics is not going to, go away. And that is precisely where I think that we ought to be alive to the fact that deep diversities is best tackled not by attempt to deliberately dissolve or ignore those differences, but to take them on board, to accommodate them as a valuable good to what promoting for. Because after all, peace and stability cannot be resurrected on mutual hatred, mutual distrust of one another. So long as institutions have a semblance of legitimacy as well as trust across wide spectrum of society, only then would you be able to promote peace and stability in deeply divided place like Manipur.
But let's talk about an immediate crisis. The immediate crisis is that we have thousands of weapons in the hands of civilians on both sides, right? So, for example, in the night, I went to a village dominated by Meiteis where I met rice farmers carrying guns, standing in bunkers, and saying they don't sleep at night anymore. When I pressed further, they said that they had many Kuki friends. In fact, one of them said, my best friend is from the Kuki community. And then he couldn't really elaborate on why that friendship had collapsed today. But they had guns. So this was a Meitei dominated village. Then I went into the front line in the Kangpopi area. If we can come out of this and show those images. And there we saw young students. This boy wanted to join the Indian Army. There was another boy who's in class 12. Here he is. And I told him, he laughed. I said, your gun is bigger than you. And you're actually talking about child combatants. It's a very serious and unfortunate thing. Can we begin having a conversation about peace without the disarming of civilian population?
I think that's a very important role. The question is that Manipur presents a classic example of ethnic security dilemma, which Barry Posehn talks about in international relations theory, which essentially means that when there is a conspicuous absence of overarching security, which the state is expected to provide, then ethnic communities begin to rely on their own security. And that is precisely what now unravels in Manipur. And what is deeply worrying is that all communities are armed to the teeth. And that precisely means that it has both short-term as well as long-term implications, precisely because the kind of discourse or the kind of conversation that happens seems to be dictated by a very coercive, structure. And until and unless a semblance of trust and legitimacy is built on the state, and that is precisely why I keep on, emphasizing that some semblance of responsibility has to be fixed from the top. And unless this is done, and unless someone who has a wider appeal as well as legitimacy in the state takes charge, the absolute presence or overwhelming presence of central paramilitary force is unlikely to be helpful, precisely because Article 355 is not in place formally, nor Article 356, that is President rule, is imposed, which essentially means that the present dispensation, which does not have the trust of overwhelming section of the society, continues to be at the helm of affairs. So long as such arrangement continue to be perpetuated, this deep security dilemma would be perpetuated. And that is precisely why, both in the short as well as in the long run, I feel that responsibility and accountability has to be fixed. And once a semblance of trust and legitimacy is restored at the institutional level, we can in effect eke out or start
So
meaningful
basically,
conversation as well as dialogue.
basically, you're saying that people need to see heads roll at the very top institutions of power for a dialogue to actually begin. And I'll tell you, the one thing that I found that the Kuki and the Metis people agree on is the failure of the state. Both communities are not happy for maybe different reasons. Now, my question to you right now is to talk. You spoke about the lack of institutional trust, the breakdown of institutional trust. One of the very dangerous things is the army now being dragged into this. The Indian Army is a very conservative force. It rarely issues public statements. Twice in the last 3 months, it's had to issue a statement saying, "Don't accuse us of bias. We operate without fear or favor." We've seen ourselves, women stopping soldiers in instances, asking them to show proof of ID. And I'm sure you've been following this debate. How much does this concern you?
This deeply concerns me because, in the mayhem which unravels since May 3rd, we seems to be mixing up too many things that should have been separated otherwise. For example, the lumping together of individuals with institution per se in terms of the question of trust and legitimacy of the army or the security apparatus, for example, is one such instances in which uh, you know the armed personnel, some of them who are placed in a very responsible roles, belong to a particular specific communities whose credibility is under the scanner precisely because under conflict scenarios, not only in the context of Manipur, but also in other conflict scenarios, whenever community who are participants to the combat or to the conflict are posted in the very sensitive, vulnerable positions, it is a standard protocol that such officers are in effect taken back and not posted there. And because of this, a lot of smear campaign, a lot of credibility doubt have arisen across communities. But to tarnish, the army or the Assam Rifles as an institution is, I think, quite unwarranted, as well as it is off the mark because the commendable role of the Assam Rifles or the paramilitary force in all this violence is quite commendable to my mind.
Yes, and I've been speaking to several army officers, former heads of the Assam Rifles, who are very very disturbed at what's happening. Now, I want to play for you. Before I play that video, the Kuki community has been, you've seen many protesters standing with these placards saying, you are infiltrators. This word infiltrators has entered the conversation. If you look at the data, the last stated report by the Assam Rifles talks about approximately 2,000 infiltrations from Myanmar post 2021. A bulk of which, of course, the bulk of infiltrations have gone into Mizoram, more than 40,000. Now, this tag for your community, and in this case, I mention your community, the Kukis, as an infiltrator. How has this gone down in the community and this need now in the Kuki people to say, look, we are Indian? It started with an Independence Day function in Chura Chandpur, but then that went into a controversy because we had, and I'll play these images now. You had men with replica guns, and the Metis community started targeting this and saying, look, how can you have an armed parade on Independence Day? So it's a very chaotic conversation that is taking place. I want you to speak about both these images as well as the entire infiltrator tag that is being used today.
You see, on the question of so-called infiltrators or illegal immigrants, the kind of political discourse seems to be driven by vigilante groups who are ignorant about the nature as well as terms of Indian citizenship. So if you look at closely the terms of Indian citizenship, which is inscribed in Article 5 to 11, for example, and which in effect is used as a pretext to doubt my citizenship status, as it were. For example, if at independence in 1947 and when at the time of the enactment of India's constitution on 26 January 1950, if one of your grandparents was born in British India as defined by Government of India Act 1935, you are by birth a citizen of India. And subsequent amendments would also emphasize the fact that if you were born between 1950 to 1987, you are by birth Indian citizenship, right? So in that sense, looks like even if the so-called infiltrators or illegal immigrants who migrated from, Burma, which was a part of British India, settled down in some of the villages in southern Manipur or in Lamka or Churaganpur district for all these generations. You cannot tarnish them as if they are infiltrators or illegal immigrants. That flies off the face of the terms of Indian citizenship discourse. That's one. And the second point that you have correctly raised is pertinent here because the state government has constituted its own subcommittee early this year. And it comes out with a report whereby only 2,174 illegal immigrants were detected. Remember that these illegal immigrants did not come as illegal immigrants per se out of their own volition, but they are forced to flee because of the outbreak of civil war-like situation, thanks to the military takeover in February 2021 in Myanmar. So although India is not a signatory, for example, to the United Nations Convention on Refugee, the principle of refoulement suggests that at least for the sake of humanitarianism, India is obligated under international law to accept and to give temporary relief and rehabilitation to this. But somehow the kind of discourse is so acerbic and so, so distasteful that you brand the whole community as if they're all illegal immigrants, which is very unacceptable. That's one. On the second issue of the Indian, independence parade, in effect, that was, I think, an act of overzealousness on the part of some of these youth who possibly want to send political signal that this violence have in effect prepared them for any counter defensive action. That's one. But purportedly this was done to affirm that the village defense volunteers, who carried these toy guns, as it were, in effect, shows their loyalty and patriotism to the Indian state, which they seek to contrast with some of the proscribed very militant organization which openly boycott the Independence Day. So in that sense, it's a kind of competitive political messaging, that comes out, and I think we should not read too much into the implication of this.
Okay, let me ask you this. I don't know, you follow this very closely, but one of the tribal leaders told me that there were talks on between the Kuki insurgents that have suspended operations since 2018, the Kuki Sioux groups, and the central government, and a peace accord, the contours of a peace accord and an autonomous territorial council had been agreed. The announcement was going to be made in May. Are you familiar with this?
I am broadly familiar, but I'm not privy to some of the minute details of what really transpired in the talk, as it were. But it looks like there has been a lot of negotiation as well as finality, which almost assume a culmination of the peace accord. Given that the negotiation, the tripartite agreement was in force since 2008. And the kind of settlement seems to be that it's a part of a larger scheme of things, which the NDA government is up to, because there is a pending bill in the Rajya Sabha which in effect try to change the terms as well as nature of autonomy in the whole of Northeast India by giving more expansive powers. In fact, I'm privy to that document as well, having worked on these areas for quite some time. So in that sense, it is a part of a larger scheme in which there are attempts to territorially accommodate across the board in Manipur, in Assam, in Meghalaya, and for that matter in Mizoram, in places where the sixth schedule is in place. So I think in that sense, the BJP is in fact geared up to a political settlement in which many of these, territorially concentrated communities which already have some semblance of autonomy are given a more upgraded autonomy status. So in that sense, I think it's a part of a continuum in the long drawn process.
Just in the end, the Meitei community in its petitions to the government keeps raising an argument that the numbers, the demographics are changing. You would have heard them making this argument. We've just discussed the infiltration since 2021, but I had a Meitei community leader on this show who kept arguing that the numbers are now down to 44%, and this is their submission to the government. How does the Kuki community respond? Because this is out there in the public narrative. Our numbers are reducing.
Mhm. I think, unfortunately, Barkha, this debate on demographic depends upon, your location in the community at large. And if you are a Kokizomi, for example, you would use some of this colonial ethnography to suggest, for example, that large segment of the Kuki in the southern part of Manipur were not enumerated until the 1920s, because remember that the administrative extension, administrative unit subdivision was opened in southern Manipur only in 1921, and from 19 till 1983 it was labeled as Manipur South, as it were. So from 1983 only we have Churachandpur district proper, which in effect got its name after the former king of Manipur. So in that sense, I think there has to be a holistic understanding of how this demographic change over time. That's one. On the more concrete and foundational issue of accurate or authentic data, as it were, if you look at the census data, for example, between the 1960s and the latest decadal census, you'll find insignificant increase in the proportion of Manipur. For example, between 1991 to 2001 and 2001 to 2011, you have a decadal increase of Manipur population at around 24%. And if you disaggregate it in terms of the district-wise decadal growth rate, for example, in the context of Churachandpur, which is now on the boil today, you have a decadal increase of 19 point something percent. So in that sense, when you compare with some of these other districts on the north, Senapati, for example, witnessed an increase of 241%. So in that sense, you see, there is a selective targeting of particular district taken out to kind of project as if there is a disproportionate increase, which in effect does not square up with the census data. And unless these are authentic, the data need to be authenticated. And I do not see that some of these data that you had across are not, census of
Okay.
India data.
Okay, I want to ask you a personal question in the end. You have, of course, appealed to the Manipur High Court against the cases you're facing. But in effect, that electoral fraud allegation is questioning your citizenship as an Indian. You yourself, Professor, are being called or accused of not being Indian. How does that make you feel?
I really feel hurt and I really feel pity for people because they are certainly driven by or intoxicated by this linguistic nationalism just to tarnish individuals or my community at large on a baseless foundation. And just to search for the ghost of my father after 16 years of his death and use that as a ruse or an excuse, to doubt my citizenship is it's very pitiful. It's quite shameful as well, which in effect bespeaks about the civic education of my fellow citizens based in the valley areas, some of them, right? So in that sense, to allow vigilante groups to drive a kind of linguistic nationalism, a kind of misinformed as well as misconceived idea of citizenship is going to cause much harm between fellow citizens in terms of the feeling of fraternity, the feeling of equality, or the feeling of equal entitlement, which we are promised to be protected of by the Constitution of India. So to that extent, I feel that I'm hurt, but I also feel shameful as well as feel pity for people who use very preconceived as well as misconstrued data as well as interpretation to simply charge and frame me for this just for the sake of vilification campaign which suits a particular political discourse.
Well, you have expressed your faith in the legal process, and the Supreme Court has given you these 2 weeks to seek justice and intervention from the Manipur High Court. We'll check in on what happens with you on that after a few days, Professor. Thank you so much for talking to us. And I think the bottom line, as you have said, is that there has to be accountability for what's happened in the last 3 months. Without some visible accountability, how do you even begin talking about peace, disarming civilians? Trust has to be brought back, and there has to be visible penalizing, as it were, for those that allowed this to happen on their watch. Thank you. That is the essence of, in a way, your argument. You made many arguments. I'm simplifying, of course, but thank you so much for talking to us, and take care.
Thank you so much, Sia Barkha.
Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.